Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week. The media have always made a big deal out of the ICF's links with the Chelsea Headhunters. Both mobs are right-wing, both mobs are British and proud of it, and both mobs hate Celtic and the IRA. All of that is true, especially the last bit about Celtic and the IRA. And it is also true that some of our lot would gather in the Toby Jug in Glasgow city centre and travel down to West London to give the Headhunters a hand. Some of our top boys, Davy Carrick included, were frequent visitors to Stamford Bridge. Although I am a home bird and Rangers through and through, I have a lot of time for Chelsea. That said, I consider my English team to be Manchester City, many of whose lads have real loyalist leanings. Over the years, I have also become aware that most English hooligans have a soft spot for Rangers. They love the way that we proudly fly the Union Jack and proclaim our Britishness. It is no coincidence that when a Scottish Defence League was set up, mirroring the much bigger English Defence League, Rangers fans dominated its membership. While English firms respect Rangers, they loathe Celtic. In particular, they hate the way that so many Celtic fans continue to venerate IRA murderers. And after the bombings in Warrington, Manchester, Birmingham and London, can you blame them? There is a myth propagated by many of the Celtic-minded that they have a special bond with Man United. They base this theory on the fact that, at one time, United was owned by a Roman Catholic family, the Edwards, and that Matt Busby and Tommy Docherty and some of its other managers have been Catholics. Even Celtic's best-known hooligan, John O'Kane, has swallowed this claptrap. In a recent newspaper interview, he said that the Celtic mob had never had any problems with the Red Army or the Men in Black. It is, of course, shite. In fact, it is shite on stilts. I have spoken to many Red Army and they despise Celtic and the very large minority of their fans who belt out the Republican hate anthems. All of this does not mean that the ICF, me included, did not enjoy taking on English firms. We did, and with as much relish as when we faced Aberdeen, Hibs or the Utility. We have always enjoyed going down south, rubbing everyone's nose in it, from Spurs in 1962 to Manchester in 2008. There is no doubt about it. Taking on the English, especially in England, is a big fucking thrill, both in a football sense and as a hooligan. In fact, one of my biggest disappointments as a young teenager was when my mum refused to let me go down to White Hart Lane for a pre-season friendly in 1986. I was gutted when my brother came back from London and told me they had it all day with Spurs, not to mention the shoplifting expeditions in Oxford Street. By the way, I have made a couple of videos about the history of Rangers firms over the years. Check out my channel and you will see these other Rangers videos right here. So, I am sorry to disappoint the conspiracy theorists. Rangers have always taken on English mobs, and we always will. English firms that Rangers have clashed with: number 1. Sunderland. In fact, it was a game against the Wearsiders that put the ICF right in the middle of the media spotlight. It was July 1993 and Rangers were supplying the opposition for Gary Bennett's testimonial at the old Roker Park. The main body of ICF got a bus from the city centre, while I got a seat on a Scarfers coach from Shettleston. I was excited to be going down there, because I knew it would be tasty. My only problem was that I had had a heavy alcohol and ecstasy session the night before, and was faced with the inevitable low. To combat it, I had taken 3 temazepam tabs, and when they were mixed with the copious amounts of lager, I managed to get through on the road to the northeast of England. I was feeling even more aggressive than usual. The ICF met up at 12 in a pub called Digby's, where we stayed until late afternoon, before moving to a pub next to a shoe shop. The bar was down a flight of stairs, and as we walked in, we saw a group of local lads, clearly annoyed that their pub was being taken over. Those same lads would later portray themselves as angels. They weren't. The atmosphere grew more and more poisonous. Two locals in particular were giving it big licks, making all sorts of smart remarks about Scots. I could sense that something serious was about to go off, and when someone shouted, "Orange bastards," it did. In a flash, two of the Sunderland boys got slashed across the cheeks. I didn't see the slashings, but I did chase some of the other loudmouths up the stairs and along the street, where we pelted them with shoes we had lifted from the neighbouring shop. At the time it didn't seem that big a deal. Just one mob sticking it to another mob. Little did we know. Realising that the cops would be on the way, we left the area pretty quickly and mobbed up again, ready to walk to Roker Park. There were many more skirmishes on the way to the ground, including a fight with Rangers Scarfers, a fight that threatened to become very nasty indeed. It wasn't just us. It seemed to be going off all over Sunderland. The Sun later printed a helpful timetable of terror, which gave the time and place of dozens of incidents, including a man being glassed, a robbery at bookies, a car being stolen, Rangers fans urinating in gardens, and of course more fights than you could shake a stick at. My only recollection of the game, I was behind the goals, is of a Sunderland fan running onto the playing surface and trying to get into our end. The funny cunt then whipped off his jacket to reveal a Celtic strip underneath. We were raging, and the cops had a real job on their hands to stop me, several other ICF and a large number of Rangers scarfers from getting onto the pitch and giving our uninvited visitor a right kicking. The trip back up to Glasgow was uneventful, but as we drove home, a media storm of immense proportions was blowing up. The newspaper headlines said it all. Rangers, night of shame. A bloody disgrace. Thugs united. Police probe Casuals. / probe cops at Ibrox. As usual, the whole affair was shrouded in a fog of confusion. Some people, most notably the police, blamed Rangers hooligans from Scotland for the trouble. However, representatives of Rangers supporters groups claimed that casuals attached to English clubs, but wearing Rangers strips, were responsible. Rangers Football Club took a different tack, with David Murray aiming his guns at the press coverage. It has been blown out of all proportion. I think the media caused this reaction. A few fans were arrested for being drunk and disorderly. That is not going mental. Even the police fell out about who should be blamed for the trouble. The top cop from the Criminal Intelligence Service based in London stated that a 50-strong mob of supporters from Scotland with links to the ultra-right-wing British National Party caused most of the violence. It was rubbish, of course. Some of our guys may have voted for the BNP, and others may have sympathised with some of their views, but there was no formal link between us and the BNP or any other political party. The English cop then showed just how clueless he was by claiming that police saw a vehicle with a flag sticking outside the window with ICF on it, and that ICF stood for Ibrox City Fan Club. What a plonker. He obviously didn't know that our firm is like West Ham's called the Intercity Firm. Where he got Ibrox City Fan Club from, I will never know. Criminal intelligence right enough. The ludicrous claims by the English police that we are fascist sympathisers was given short shrift by the man responsible for policing at Ibrox, Chief Superintendent Lawrence McIntyre. He told the press that, "I have no intelligence saying there is a Rangers group linked to the BNP." It might have been nice for people who are going to make comments like that to come to the man who polices every game at Ibrox. The furore refused to die down, with the focus now switching to the two boys who had been slashed. They were featured in many newspaper reports and on television, with their slash marks clear for all to see. Pedro, one of our boys, saw this as a good chance to enhance our media profile. He contacted the Daily Record and arranged to meet their reporters in a Glasgow pub. During the meeting, Pedro boasted about the trouble the ICF had caused all over Scotland, and went to say that it had been ICF boys who had slashed the two Sunderland fans. The reporters persuaded him to hand over photos taken both inside and outside Digby's, which they used in a front page splash that also took up 2 pages inside the paper. Yes, Pedro got publicity, but not the type you want. He and 3 other ICF, all brothers, were arrested and charged with the slashings. As far as the authorities were concerned, it was all done with an eye to maximising the public relations possibilities, with the police turning up at their homes complete with camera crews and batteries of press photographers to witness the arrests. That to me is trial by media, and it makes a mockery of the justice system. The 4 guys then had to endure a few months of hassle in their private life and at work. In fact, they all lost their jobs. The only consolation was that when the trial finally came around, they were all acquitted. Sunderland put the ICF on the map. It shifted the focus away from Hibs and Aberdeen, the traditional bogeymen. It also taught us how easy it is for the media to mess up your life. They say that elephants never forget. Believe me, even a pachyderm with total recall has nothing on a football hooligan with a grudge against another firm. When Sunderland came north in July 1999 to provide the opposition for Ian Ferguson's testimonial, they were still raging about what happened in 1993, 6 years before. We heard that they were looking for revenge, and we were delighted. It was a time when we were regrouping. The Scottish national firm to which many of us had been attached had been disbanded, and the boys from Rangers had returned to the ICF fold, hoping to build it up again as a fighting force. My involvement with the SNF helped. The publicity it created prompted boys to rejoin. Being a casual was in vogue again, and we hoped that we would go from strength to strength. Our main problem was getting a mob out early enough. It was a midweek game with an evening kick-off, and as many of our boys lived outside of Glasgow, it was difficult to get everyone there on time. So, I was pleasantly surprised when I walked into our pub of choice, Dr. Brown's in Queen Street, and found a fair number already ensconced. By 7, the group had swollen to 50, of whom 25, me included, went to Ibrox. The plan was that the other half would join us after the game to take on Sunderland, who we had again been assured were well up for it. I was in the Broom Loan for the game, which Rangers won 3-1, directly above Sunderland's Scarfers and their mob. It looked promising. They had a tasty-looking crew out. We decided to leave at half-time and go back to Doc Brown's to get things organised. We were given the honour of a police escort out of the ground, and bizarrely, the old Bill walked us right past the Sunderland fans on the bottom tier. I looked at the other ICF in disbelief. We thought it was a set-up, as no doubt did Sunderland, who were gobsmacked by the police tactics. We all thought the cops wanted us to have a go at Sunderland, at which point we would be arrested. I was only a few feet from their mob, but the only action was of the verbal variety. "Glad to see you're here. Hope we'll see you later on," I sneered. "Yeah, see you soon," they replied. By the time the game had finished, at about 9:30, we had regrouped in Doc Brown's. Some of the boys went out scouting but saw no sign of Sunderland. We didn't, perhaps surprisingly, have a phone number, so we couldn't call them. I was still confident it would only be a matter of time before they turned up. However, by 10:15, with no sign of our friends from the northeast, some of the boys were getting restless. A few even drifted away. At 50:30, with nothing on the horizon, I advised those who lived furthest away to go and catch a train, which reduced our numbers to 30. 15 minutes later, with the rest of us ready to call it a night, I took a call. It was one of our spotters who told me that 50 Sunderland were in the Bristol Bar, a well-known loyalist pub in Duke Street. Game on, I thought. Most of the group piled into taxis, while I went in a white Mercedes owned by Colin Bell, an ICF member who sadly is no longer with us. We bombed the 2 miles to Duke Street and got off at the Loudon Tavern. There were 15 of us, with another 15 en route, Colin and I were waiting for nobody. He went into the boot of the Merc, pulled out a baseball bat, and with a shout of, "Let's have these English bastards," we steamed right in, ably backed up by the other boys. Sunderland had obviously been expecting us and had dozens of bottles to hand, which they threw at us in volleys. It didn't deter us in the slightest, and the front five ICF, of which I was one, soon had them on their toes. I had a bottle in my hand, which I was swinging about for all I was worth, until I launched it at the head of one of their boys, missing him narrowly. Sunderland must have realised how few of us there were, because they regrouped and charged, surrounding me and another 5 ICF. Colin had been wildly swinging his bat, doing an excellent job of keeping them at bay, but some sneaky twat hit him on the shoulder with a bottle, causing him to drop the bat. Shit, I thought. It was silly not to wait for the rest of the mob. By now, there were bottles whizzing past my head, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of boys trying to trip me up. Colin, meanwhile, had already been tripped up and was taking a pasting from fists and feet. Worst of all, he took 2 sickening blows to the head from his own baseball bat. It wasn't looking good. Then the cavalry arrived. After what seemed like an age but in reality was only about 30 seconds, the ICF taxis pulled up and our boys stormed out. A cry of ICF, ICF went up and we re-engaged, helping Colin to his feet in the process. One of our boys found a set of aluminum ladders, which we proceeded to use as a battering ram on Sunderland. We managed to trip some of them up, and now it was their turn to experience a bit of pain. But give the Mackems their due. They came right back at us, with the advantage swinging one way and then the other. The air was thick with flying bottles, and a few of our lads got hit on the head and went down. For some reason the old bill took an age, in F5 terms, to get there, which meant that we were able to battle it out for a good 15 minutes. The violence was so bad that buses had to stop on Duke Street as the rival factions fought toe-to-toe in the middle of the road. There was even time for a moment of comedy, as the ladders were used as a missile by us and seconds later by them. It was one of the best fights I have ever been involved in, and it only stopped when we heard the wail of the sirens. Finally, the cops had arrived, and it was time to get to fuck. In any event, by that time, both mobs were exhausted. In the days after the battle with Sunderland, I found out that 5 of my ICF pals had been hospitalised. Colin Bell had concussion, others had cuts, 1 or 2 suffered broken bones. Sunderland won that particular contest. 12 of them had to go to hospital, 2 with broken noses. It was just so ferocious. I wish every fight could have been like that. But we were helped by 2 factors. Duke Street is slightly off the beaten track, and the police took a long time to get there. Fair play to Sunderland. They were as game as anyone I have ever encountered. The last place we expected to find them was in a Rangers pub in the East End. I would say that honours were even that night, even if they did outnumber us 50-30. The ones I felt sorry for were the street cleaners, because Duke Street looked like the aftermath of a war zone the next day. It was strewn with bricks, broken glass, stones, and even items of clothing. I would also like to pay tribute to Colin Bell, a true loyalist who did time for gun running for the UDA. You are sadly missed, Colin. English firm. 2. Everton. I had never been to Liverpool in my life, so when, in July 1997, the opportunity came along to go down to Goodison Park for the Dave Watson testimonial, I jumped at it. Liverpool Football Club has never had much of a mob, but Everton had a fearsome reputation in hooligan circles, and an even more fearsome one for being blade merchants. The city of Liverpool is also renowned for its nightlife, so what could be better? Drink, great drugs, a riotous night out, and last, but by no means least, a spot of football violence. Despite Merseyside's admirable tradition of hosting Orange Walks, the biggest takes place in Southport. Many Rangers fans believe that both the city's clubs are pro-Celtic. There may be some truth in that, but despite their apparent sympathies, I have always had a soft spot for Everton, the club that provided both Trevor Steven and Gary Stevens to Rangers. It was an evening kick-off, so we left at the crack of dawn on the day of the game. Some ICF went by car, others on the train, but I travelled down on the bus being run by the Shettleston Rangers Supporters Club. By 1 o'clock, Rangers fans had taken over every boozer in the city centre, as well as those close to Goodison. I was in a city pub with 10 other ICF and a group of boys from Shettleston. Although it was generally quiet in the afternoon, there was one incident of note. We heard that some Everton boys were giving Rangers scarfers the big one, which of course is a no-no as far as we are concerned. Without hesitation we steamed out of the pub and a little skirmish with Everton ensued. With the cops quickly on the scene, it was nothing to write home about. Apart that is from what happened to Harkey, one of the most fearsome hooligans of them all. This wee ginger-haired spec-wearing cunt knocked him on his arse with a punch that Floyd Mayweather Jr. would have been proud of. As you can imagine, Harkey got a severe ribbing for it later on. Talking of the Merseyside police, they took no shit from anyone. Even the happy drunk wasn't safe with them. I remember seeing 3 pissed-up Ranger fans being dragged up an alleyway and getting a few slaps and kicks for their trouble. It was a fly move by the cops, making sure they were out of range of closed-circuit television cameras as they indulged in a spot of casual brutality. In fact, most of them had a zero-tolerance policy towards anyone of a blue and white persuasion, and didn't hesitate to lash out at the slightest provocation. I remember being surprised that the locals didn't bat an eyelid at the police violence. At 6 o'clock, we made our way to the game, having split up into small groups to avoid detection. Word was coming back to us that there was a lot of trouble in the pubs around Goodison, and that the Everton mob were trying it on with our scarfers, who, to their credit, were giving as good as they got. We also heard that Everton were tooled up, although coming from Glasgow, that wasn't exactly a big deal for us. Some of us were too, a couple of boys had CS gas, while more than a few of us were carrying knives. As we got closer to the stadium, it was going off all over the shop between the scarfers. Then we saw them. Everton's mob, 40 strong. There were only 20 of us, but that didn't matter. We charged, backing them off with comparative ease. I went toe-to-toe with this fat lad, who was shouting his scouse mouth off. "You Orange! See you next Tuesday!" he was yelling, which I have to say surprised me as I landed one of several punches on his ugly coupon. That was the last violence we saw that day, although by all accounts it was a tasty day all around the ground and in the city. The game itself was disappointing. It was Marco Negri's debut, but we lost 3-2. I was surprised by how old and really quite antiquated the stand was, because I had always thought Everton were a Big Six club in English terms. English teams that Rangers have battled. Firm number 3. Manchester United. Sunderland and Everton are one thing. Man United are quite another. When we drew the Red Devils in the Champions League of 2004, the excitement in ICF ranks went right off the charts. The simple fact is that the 3 groups attached to United, the Red Army, the Men in Black and the Cockney Reds make up the biggest one-club mob in Britain, perhaps even in the world. There was also, as I have explained in a previous chapter, our history with them, which goes back to the early 70s, when we took the Stretford end and gave them a right going over. As Tony O'Neill points out in his second book about the United mob, the Men in Black, inside Manchester United's football hooligan firm, they hadn't forgotten what happened 30 years earlier and were looking for revenge. Many of a Rangers persuasion, and not just the ICF, equate Man U with Celtic. There is a little evidence for that view. The club was once known as Newton Heath, and before adopting the name Manchester United, consideration was given to calling it Manchester Celtic, an idea that was surely dropped on the grounds of good taste. The Edwards family, which owned the club for decades, was Roman Catholic, as were most of its prominent managers, who included fanatical Celtic supporter Sir Matt Busby and former Hoops favourite Tommy Docherty. But I don't buy into the theory that United and Celtic are joined at the hip. Why would Mancunians give the time of day to the scum who glorify the Provisional IRA, the group that bombed the heart out of Manchester, murdering many of their fellow citizens in the process? Some people ask why United planned to bring such a big mob to Glasgow for that Champions League game in the year 2003. They argue that it must be down to the fact that United are Celtic-minded and just as anti-Rangers as their friends from the East End. Nothing could be further from the truth. United turned out in force that night to avenge the Battle of Old Trafford in 1974. The other reason, of course, is that by this time the ICF were by some distance Scotland's leading mob, and they wanted to take us on. Forget the politics. Forget the so-called Irish heritage. Forget Edwards, Busby, Macari, Crerand and Docherty. This was simply a case of one top mob desperate to take on another top mob. The ICF didn't have its troubles to seek at this time. Half of us were on bail following mobbing and rioting charges for the fights with Hibs in Dundee and/or Aberdeen in Glasgow. I was the only one on bail for both, having been picked out by Kenny Scott, the country's top anti-football hooligan cop, who it seemed to me was intent on breaking the ICF. If I was caught in a further act of football violence, I was looking at an immediate 110-day remand, plus a good few years in jail when the Hibs and Aberdeen incidents were factored in. Whatever way you looked at it, I was taking a massive risk. Another factor was general police pressure, which at the time was intense. It was not uncommon for leading ICF to have their doors chapped in the early hours of the morning every 6 weeks or so, and then be hauled down to Helen Street Cop Shop for questioning. In addition, we had a strong suspicion that there was a grass in the ranks of the ICF, and also that the cops were sporadically bugging our phones. Our other problem was that we would be vastly outnumbered by United, even if all the boys on bail had been available. Big Boris, one of our top guys, knew many of the Red Army, and he had been told that they would be fielding their biggest mob yet in Glasgow. I take most of the responsibility for not getting something more concrete organised for United's visit, but the twin pressures of bail and police harassment were almost impossible to overcome. I also had to be careful on a personal level. I was on my second life ban from Ibrox, and another incident would surely have put me completely beyond the pale as far as Rangers were concerned. It might sound like I am making excuses, but that was the situation on the ground at the time. Strangely, on the night before the game, the ICF drank with Red Army and Men in Black members, the friends of Big Boris. Our first port of call had been a pub in Sauchy Hall Street, but as we were about to order a drink, we noticed 5 guys in the corner. One was Rab Hines, the top football intelligence cop in Glasgow. He was there with 4 other cops, FI officers from Glasgow and Manchester. Hines was the bane of my life. He was constantly on our case. We beat a hasty retreat before they spotted us. The presence of the Manchester FI guys brought home to us the scale of the resources the police would be throwing at the game. Not only would we have to take on the biggest mob in the land, there was also a major police operation to contend with. There was no set plan for dealing with Man U, just a loose one to mob up before the game and see where it took us. Boris's information about the size of United's firm was spot on, because more than 700 of them turned up in Glasgow. A couple of hours before the game started, I was 100 miles away between Arbroath and Montrose. I was working as a van driver, and with my shift complete, I was burning the rubber to get to Ibrox for the pre-match skirmishes with the Red Army and the MIB. Such was my desperation to get there on time that I barrel-rolled the transit van I was driving. Amazingly, I walked away from the accident without a scratch, and somehow got to Govan half an hour after kick-off. In my absence, Man United were taking the piss big time, striding around as if they owned the place, monopolising our pubs, attacking anyone they didn't like the look of. The only opposition to them was a group of 20 ICF, including Harkey, Bomber and Boris. They put up a good show, but were swamped by the sheer size of the mob ranged against them. When I heard what had happened, I was gutted. I was a main face and the main organiser, and I had missed the action, an action that saw our boys take a right pounding. I was determined that we would take it to them before they left Glasgow. After the game, 40 of us mobbed up in the now closed Clashen pub in Paisley Road West, and from there we walked to Copland Road tube station. We were desperate even for a small dose of revenge, and our frustration was such that when a few Rangers scarfers, mistaking us for Man United's mob, attacked us, we gave them a bit of a slap on the train into the city centre. We got off at St Enoch's, but were met by wall-to-wall police, which forced us to split into smaller groups. We knew United were drinking close by, in all bar one, and although it was a suicide mission, we were determined to have a go. Such was my anger at United, taking liberties, that I can only describe my mood as deranged. I walked towards their pub with only one thought in my mind. I got within 50 yards of all bar one when I was spotted by Rab Hines and his fellow FI officers. Two of his colleagues grabbed me and unceremoniously dragged me into a shop doorway. "Get yourself to fuck out of the city centre or you'll be arrested," one of them growled. They knew that, because of my bail situation, I had no choice but to obey their instructions, and my mission had to be aborted. I was gutted, but was already plotting my revenge. For the away leg, I was confident of taking 100 boys to Manchester, despite the fact that, quite scandalously in my opinion, the city centre was in lockdown, and tickets were as scarce as the proverbial hen's teeth. I travelled down with Big Boris and Swedgers, and we found superior lodgings at the 5-star Midland Hotel. As with the home leg, we went out drinking with Boris's Red Army pals the night before the game, and who was in our party, but the legend that is Fat MacLeod, who was now living in Manchester, where he had become a member of the United mob. It was a great night, with no animosity. The next morning we heard that Mickey Francis, legendary leader of the Manchester City Governor's mob, had opened his pub for us, thus flouting the mass closure policy adopted by the Manchester authorities. We jumped into a taxi and went to Mickey's, but when we got to our destination, I was dejected. There were only 30 ICF in the place, a really poor show after what happened at Ibrox. To make matters worse, it wasn't long before legions of Greater Manchester police officers arrived. The game was a bogey as far as FV was concerned, and to make matters worse, Rangers went down by 3-0. The two Champions League games in the year 2003 with Manchester United marked a real low point in ICF history. We hardly laid a glove on them, either on or off the field. Worse than that, they took the piss and they haven't stopped gloating ever since, as you will discover if you read O'Neill's books. We did, however, get a small dose of revenge when we met them again in the Champions League of 2010. The skirmishes outside the Broomloan and Govan stands definitely went our way, and that at least was something. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.